The cop thought I was drunk. I was actually dying. And the craziest part is he looked straight at the proof on my wrist and still decided I was lying. Yeah, that happened. It was a warm afternoon in a quiet town where nothing dramatic ever seems to happen. The kind of place where people wave at strangers and leave their doors unlocked, and I was just trying to make it home from work, like I'd done 1,000 times before. Except that day my hands started shaking on the steering wheel. My vision blurred at the edges, and that familiar sinking feeling crept into my chest. The one every type 1 diabetic knows means your blood sugar is crashing fast and you don't have time to negotiate with it. So I did exactly what doctors tell you to do. I pulled over safely, engine off, hazard lights on, parked in a pharmacy lot because if things got worse, at least I'd be somewhere help existed. And I remember thinking calmly, almost mechanically, okay, glucose tablets, center console, chew, swallow, breathe. You're fine. You've handled this before. Except my fingers wouldn't cooperate. They felt like they belonged to someone else, heavy and slow. And my head leaned back against the seat because it suddenly weighed 100 pounds. And just as I finally got the bottle open, I heard a sharp knock on my window, not gentle, not concerned, just authority tapping on glass. And when I opened my eyes, there he was, mirrored sunglasses, hand resting on his belt, posture stiff, like he'd already decided something about me before I'd even spoken, and the first words out of his mouth weren't, "Are you okay?" They were, "How much have you had to drink today?" I remember blinking at him confused, trying to process the question through the fog rolling through my brain, and I said, slow and quiet, "I didn't drink. I need sugar. My blood sugar's low." And he leaned closer, sniffed the air like he was inspecting evidence, then said, "You smell like alcohol. Your eyes are glassy," and I lifted my wrist with what little strength I had and whispered, "It's diabetes. My bracelet." Look, because that bracelet is supposed to speak for me when my body can't. It literally says type 1 diabetes in big engraved letters, and he did look. I saw his eyes move to it. I saw him read it, and then he straightened up and said, calm as anything. "Everybody's got a story." Step out of the vehicle, and I swear something inside me dropped right then, not my blood sugar that was already dropping. I mean my hope, because I realized he wasn't trying to understand. He was trying to confirm a story he'd already written in his head, you know what I mean? And I tried again. "Please, I just need sugar." And he shook his head slightly, like I was a child making excuses, and said, "You're behind the wheel impaired." That's DUI, and I wanted to laugh because it was so absurd, except I didn't have enough glucose in my brain to laugh, because here's what people don't always realize about hypoglycemia. It doesn't just make you shaky. It starves your brain. It shuts down speech, coordination, judgment. It literally eats away your ability to function, second by second. So when he told me to step out of the car, it wasn't defiance that kept me sitting there. It was biology. But he didn't see biology. He saw disobedience. And his voice got sharper. "Ma'am, if you don't step out, you're refusing a lawful order." And I thought, I am trying. I am trying so hard, and I pushed the door open, swung my legs out, stood up, and the world tilted sideways like someone had nudged the earth off its axis. My knees buckled, and he said, almost satisfied, "See that? You can't even stand straight." And I remember thinking, yeah, because my brain is running on empty. But what came out of my mouth was just a weak, "Please." And he started a field sobriety test right there in the parking lot, heel-to-toe stand on one leg. The kind of test you could fail stone sober if you had the flu. And I whispered, "If I pass out, it's because I need sugar." And he replied, "Or because you're drunk." And that sentence still echoes in my head sometimes, because it wasn't just wrong. It was dismissive in a way that felt bigger than the moment, like he wasn't seeing me at all, just a category he'd already decided I fit into, and minutes stretched out like hours, while my body kept sinking, my hands numb, my thoughts slipping, until finally a pharmacy clerk ran outside yelling, "She's diabetic, I know her." And suddenly everything changed. Suddenly he called for paramedics. Suddenly urgency existed, and by the time they checked my blood sugar, it was 38, which, if you don't know, is dangerously low seizure territory, coma territory, minutes from real damage. And later a medic told me quietly, "You're lucky. Someone recognized you." Lucky, that word stuck with me, because luck shouldn't be the thing that decides whether you live or die during a medical emergency. And that night, after I got home, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying it. His voice, my voice, the bracelet, the words, everybody's got a story. And the next day I requested the body cam footage, and when I watched it, I felt something shift inside me, not just anger, something sharper, clearer, like a switch flipping, because I realized if I had lost consciousness sooner, if that clerk hadn't come out, the report would have said suspected DUI subject non-compliant, end of story. And that thought scared me more than the low blood sugar ever did, so I called a civil rights lawyer, not from my town, not someone who played golf with city officials, someone who looked at the footage and went very quiet, then said, "We're filing," and the lawsuit that followed wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. Unlawful detention, disability, discrimination, failure to provide medical assistance, and during discovery, things started surfacing that nobody outside the department had ever seen training records showing. They hadn't had formal instruction on diabetic emergencies in over 10 years, no protocol about medical alert bracelets, prior complaints about the same officer, escalating routine stops, all cleared internally. And you could almost feel the narrative shifting from one bad interaction to a pattern nobody wanted to admit existed, and the town thought it could settle quietly, for a small amount, sweep it under the rug. But then the footage circulated among legal reviewers, and one insurance consultant reportedly said, "If this goes to trial, a jury will bury you because video doesn't lie the way reports sometimes can," and suddenly negotiations got serious. The final settlement was $2 million, which for a small town is like dropping a boulder into a pond. Budgets reshuffled, emergency meetings, taxpayers asking how one traffic stop turned into a financial earthquake. The officer resigned before termination, but that wasn't the end. The state certification board reviewed everything, every second of footage, every word spoken, and during the hearing, someone asked him, "When you saw the medical bracelet, why didn't you call for medical assistance?" And there was silence long enough to feel heavy, and his certification was permanently revoked, entered into a national database so he couldn't just move somewhere else and start over with a new badge. His law enforcement career ended right there in that room, and people always ask me if the money felt like winning, and honestly, it didn't feel like winning. It felt like proof that what happened wasn't in my head, proof that I hadn't imagined the dismissal or the danger. But the real turning point came after, when I realized I could either close that chapter and try to forget, or I could use it. So I started speaking at council meetings, then committees, then state hearings, telling lawmakers exactly what hypoglycemia feels like, making them watch the video, asking them one question: if that bracelet was on your wrist, would you want it ignored? And eventually legislation passed requiring officers statewide to undergo medical emergency recognition training. Diabetic episodes, seizures, neurological conditions, clear directive. When there's doubt, treat it as medical first, criminal second. And now recruits learn about cases like mine during training, not because I wanted attention, but because I wanted the next person in my position to be met with help instead of suspicion. And yeah, I won the case. Yeah, he lost his badge. But the truth is, the story doesn't end cleanly like a movie, because there are still people who say the settlement was too big. People who insist he was just doing his job. People who ask how he could have known. And I always come back to the same thing. He did know. He saw the bracelet. He heard me say I needed sugar. He had the option to call for medical help from the start. This wasn't about not knowing, it was about not believing, and there's a difference, a big one. And sometimes I wonder how many other people have had medical crises mistaken for crimes but never had the strength or support to fight back. How many stories ended quietly instead of in courtrooms? Because not everyone survives long enough to hire a lawyer, you know what I mean? And that's why I still talk about it, because curiosity could have changed everything that day. Just a moment of, maybe she's telling the truth, could have saved time, money, careers, stress, all of it. Instead, ego took the lead and reality had to catch up later. So when you see someone pulled over on the side of the road or someone acting disoriented in public, I want you to pause before assuming the worst, because distress and guilt can look similar from a distance. And the standard we ignore is the standard we accept. So now I want to hear from you. Honestly, do you think what happened to me was a tragic mistake or a preventable failure? Do you think that settlement was justice or excess? And have you ever witnessed a situation where someone was judged before they had the chance to explain? Tell me in the comments, because conversations like this are how systems change. And trust me, change only happens when people decide not to look away.